All right, so welcome CBY615 Foundations of Data Protection. Week one, really two topics that we're going to talk about here. First one being firewalls, and the second thing that we're going to talk about is intrusion detection system. Got some slides here for you for the firewall, so we'll brush through these, and then I'll be putting out some stuff on intrusion detection systems as well. Also, make sure that you read through all the course introductions. New to this course is the opportunity to participate in some live online classes, which I would like to do on a weekly basis, preferably on a Monday or a Tuesday early in each week. And they'll be later in the evening because I do have some West Coast persons that would I would like to make sure that they have the opportunity to participate in as well. But I'll get you some more on that. I'll put a little tutorial out on that in a little bit. So let's get started with firewalls and information as it relates to different types of firewalls and some of the types of things that you would expect to see. Quite a few slides here, some basic information that will lay down the foundation for some of the things that you're going to read about in the required readings. All right, basic things that I want you to do, or I want you to make sure that you can understand when we get done with this, is that you need to recognize the important role of access control. We've talked about that in last class. Identify and discuss some widely used authentication factors that we typically see, and then describe firewall tech. So basically, what we're looking at here is some technical controls. Obviously, you know my position. We're not going to technology our way out of any of the issues, but we still have to recognize, and we still do recognize, that there are technological controls that are essential for enforcing things like policies, and many of those functions directly involve human control, and therefore when we talk about firewalls and we talk about other things like intrusion detection systems, it's important to remember that we just don't take things out of the box, plug them in, and we're happy with them the way that they're functioning. They have to be managed. And that's a little bit what we want to talk about today is, how do we choose the appropriate firewall, and then as important to choosing the correct one, making sure that it's appropriately managed as well. Basically, some typical definitions that we've already discussed. Access control is the means that we use or a system uses to determine whether or how to admit an individual into a trusted area of an organization. We can break it down into three basic areas, and actually there's four, but I did not mention the fourth one at this point. We'll get to that in a little while. Mandatory access control uses data classification schemes: top secret, secret, classified, so forth and so on, and you have to have greater than the level of document. So if you're trying to read a secret document, a document that's been classified as secret, you would need to have secret or top secret classification in order to be able to read that particular document. And typically you see this in military and governmental service and those kinds of things. Non-discretionary controls, very strictly enforced versions of MAC that are managed by a central authority, and then we have discretionary access control, which is implemented at the discretion of the options of the data user. So if I create a document, I can determine who has the ability to read, write, or execute that particular document or that particular application. The fourth type of access control is role-based access control, which is really kind of where we're at now with the ability to determine an individual's level of access based upon the role that they play within the organization. So for instance, if we hire an individual and they're going to work in the accounting department as a whole is provided a certain level of access. And because you're assigned to that department, that is the level of access that you would have. Each one of these access control mechanisms or access control schemes has some strengths and weaknesses, flexibility, adaptability, and also some mismanagement issues that we can see is mostly around when individuals change positions within an organization. We need to make sure that our access controls are appropriate. Identification is a mechanism where an entity seeks to access resources, proposes a label by which they are known to the system. In other words, a supplicant is an entity that seeks a resource. So your user ID, right, is a label by which you are known to the system. They don't know me as Larry Snyder, but they do know me. The system recognizes me as L. Snyder, so forth and so on. They can be department codes, random numbers, special characters that make them unique, and some organizations generate these things as random numbers as well. Authentication is the process of validating a supplicant's purported identity using a password or a passphrase, biometric control, smart cards. There's a bunch of different ways of going about doing that. Some of the factors, again, I mentioned smart cards, synchronous tokens, asynchronous tokens, something that you may have, characteristic, retinas, fingerprints, so forth and so on. Very strong authentication. Biometrics is very strong authentication, and typically not seen in a lot of different organizations. Usually you only see a biometric type of authentication process in a highly secured network. Authorization is that matching of the authenticated entity to a list of information assets and corresponding access levels. So, for instance, in that example that I gave you, as far as an individual who was hired to work in the accounting department, their level of authorization is matched to a list of those things that they are allowed to have access to, whether it's file shares, particular documents, maybe a printer, maybe a server, so forth and so on. And it's usually based upon each authenticated user, their participation in a particular group, and then that group's level of access across multiple systems. One thing that's important as far as the authentication process is the accountability or auditability, making sure that actions on the system can be attributed to an authenticated identity, because what we really need to be able to do is to tie a particular action to a particular individual with all certainty. We must know that L. Snyder accessed this particular resource on the network share and what they did here. Many times this is accomplished through system logs, journaling, audit records, so forth and so on. But we also have to remember that there's a limitation to accountability. All it really tells us is that particular user ID was appropriately authenticated into a system and took some action. What it does not tell us is that the actual user or owner of that particular user ID was the individual that accessed that machine using that particular ID. And this is important when we talk about things like a forensic analysis of perhaps an insider abuse or a network intrusion. We have to make sure that we understand that we're only authenticating and we're only validating what a particular user ID does. Digital forensics or network analysis will not tell us if the individual that was sitting in the seat that used that particular user ID was indeed the person that it was assigned to.